Hi guys, welcome to the channel. Today we're going to talk about pacing as a way to navigate. It's very important when you're navigating to know how far you've traveled in a particular period of time. And pacing is a very good way to know that if you want to make accurate determination of how far you've traveled across the land in order to find a particular point. For example, a good way where it's practical to know this information is if you're on a hike, you know you have to turn off at a sort of right angle at some point along the trail, and you know the distance to that point, but you know that also that turn off is going to be very difficult to find. So you've got to know how far you've gone in order to determine when you need to turn off or when you need to start looking for the turn off point. So it's a good way to figure that out. Pacing is actually quite a simple exercise, and it requires a little bit of effort in the beginning just to figure out what your pace rate is as an individual. And then from there you can go on and hike and pace on a regular basis without any effort. So basically the way pacing works is a pace is every time your left foot strikes the ground. So you take a step, and then when your left foot strikes the ground again, that's one pace, okay? And the average person walks about 60 to 65 paces per 100 meters. So over a 100 meter distance, your average might be 63, which I think is what mine is going to be. And so you know every 63 paces, when you're hiking at a normal pace, that is going to be your 100 meter mark. And then you can record that and in that way measure how far you're traveling over a certain period of time. I'm also going to introduce you to the pacing beads a bit later, but first we're going to measure out an area of 100 meters. Although this is quite a short area, maybe let's make it 50 meters, and I'll pace out the 50 meter mark and then turn and pace out back, and we'll try to get an idea of how many paces on average I take for 100 meters, and then we'll know what my average is, and then we can start with the pacing. Okay, so I've got a 10 peg here and I've got a measuring tape, and I'm going to take this measuring tape and measure out 50 meters. Ordinarily I'd measure out 100 meters, but we don't have sufficient area to do that. So I'm going to measure out 50 meters. I'm going to pace out the 50 meters, turn around and continue pacing to make 100 meters, and then we'll count the paces. First, of course, I've got to take the measurements, so I'm going to start doing that. This is a 30 meter tape measure, so I'm going to have to measure 30 meter distance, put another peg in, and move along as we go. Okay, so now I've set up the pegs. It's a 50 meter distance to roughly where those bushes are and that tabletop over there. I'm going to walk there, pacing out from my left foot, counting every time my left foot strikes the ground, one pace. And I'm going to turn around and come straight back, and that will have been 100 meters I've covered, and we'll see what my pace is. And from there we can kind of determine how many meters I travel for a given pace rate. Okay. So let's start from the left foot. Okay, I've got 58 steps for the pace. It might be that I'm walking a little bit too fast or extending a bit too far. Normally I would be doing about 62, 63, but we're going to go with 58. Okay, so that's how you would measure your pace. You would need to do it several times over 100 meters, and you would need to record the average for your pace rate. Remember too that when you're hiking, this is a pace rate for level ground. If you're walking up a hill or down a hill, your pace will slow down, it'll shorten, your paces will shorten, the distance between your paces, your stride lengths will shorten, and that will obviously have an effect on how far you move. Okay, now I've put my backpack on, I'm ready to hike. I know what my pace rate is. I know that for 58 paces I'm going to get 100 meters approximately. And now I want to pace out my walk as I go along. I want to know how far I travel over a period of time. So There are two things I can do. I can use my watch to keep track of time. You can even use a stopwatch, or your cell phone if you have obviously a cell phone. You can use a stopwatch on the cell phone. And what you also need is pacing beads. Here you can see the pacing beads that I have. They're attached to leather. It's just wooden beads. Okay, I have 10 beads on the lower part and 5 beads on the upper part. Okay, and they're separated by a knot. Okay, figure 8 knot. So the way you do it is you walk your 58 paces. When you've reached 58 paces, you know you've covered 100 meters. You pull one of your beads up. Then you carry on, you walk another 58 paces, you've walked 200 meters. And you continue along that in that fashion until eventually you get to 10 beads, which is 1,000 meters. That's 1 kilometer. So then you've covered 1 kilometer, you move one of these upper beads up. That's 1 kilometer moved. Move all of these down. Begin again. Walk 58 paces, 1 kilometer, 100 meters. Walk another 58 paces, 1 kilometer, 200 meters. Another 58 paces, 1 kilometer, 300 meters. And so on. Okay? Once again, once you get to another 1,000 meters, you can push another bead up. It means you've made 2 kilometers. Obviously, you're not going to do this for an entire hike unless you were doing some kind of military operation or something like that. It's very, very good if you want to cover a distance of roughly 1 kilometer, maybe a maximum 2 kilometers from a known point on your map. It's easy to identify to a potential area where you may not know exactly where to turn off because the turn-off might not be obvious. Sometimes pathways are covered by vegetation if it's not a well-used hike, and especially if the pathway goes at a right angle off the main pathway. It might be obscured by a rock, and you're not aware that there's actually a rock blocking that view. Sometimes there's a wash through or a landslide that changes the terrain so you can't figure out where you're going. So those are all important points, but pacing is very, very useful for figuring out how far you travel in a specific time, and it's good to practice this so that you get an idea of what your general pace is on a normal hike and how it varies over rougher terrain. Obviously, going up and down, your pace is going to slow, as I mentioned previously, because you have to compensate for the climb. So you've got to shorten your paces, stride length rather, and that increases the number of paces per 100 meters, obviously. So it's going to have an effect. But anyway, that's basically how to do pacing. Thank you. Normally when people are walking, I should say, or hiking, they are going to go at a specific speed, okay? Speeds will vary between 4 and 6 kilometers per hour depending on how quickly they're walking. Most people will average between 4 to 5 kilometers per hour when they are hiking. Naismith's rule is a rule for distance covered in time that is used for hiking. It basically states that most people will take 12 to 15 minutes to cover 1 kilometer. Okay? If you're taking 12 minutes to cover a kilometer, it means that you're walking at a pace of 5 kilometers per hour. Okay? So you can measure it. Basically, it's another way of pacing yourself. And you can use Naismith's rule to figure out how long it's going to take you to do your hike before you start the hike. What you would do is measure the distance on the map, which I can show you in a later video. You measure the distance traveled, okay? And then you can use that usually with a piece of string. You can trace out the distance, or you can fold a piece of paper to follow the trail you're on, and then work out using the scale of the map how far you're going to go. And then you can figure out from the distance, based on an average expected time of 12 minutes per kilometer, you can figure out how long it's going to take you to walk the trail. That's excluding the time taken to take short breaks or to stop for any other reason, to stop for views or whatever. The other thing to take into account is, as I've mentioned, if you're going up or downhill, you are going to walk at a slower pace. With Naismith's rule, you have 12 minutes per kilometer average speed. Okay. If you are going uphill or downhill, add 10 minutes for every 100 meter climbed or 100 meters descent. Okay, so 100 meters climbed, add 10 minutes to your time. 100 meters descent, add 10 minutes to your climb. So, for example, you walk a distance of 12 kilometers. Okay. That's going to be 144 minutes, okay, 12 times 12. Okay, it's 144 minutes. of walking time, actual walking time. And let's say during that hike you did maybe 300 meters ascent and descent. So it's going to be 144 minutes, adding 30 minutes to that for the 10 minutes for each 100 meters climbed, for the 300 meters climbed. So basically you can kind of gauge how long it's going to take you in actual walking time before the hike, and it gives you an idea how to pace yourself during the day for your hike so that you get home on time, or you reach your destination on time. You allow enough time to enjoy the scenery, to enjoy the hike, and basically that's Naismith's rule. Very useful, and it's a very important part of pacing itself. And that's, of course, is all linked to distance, and distance is linked to scale, and scale is linked to the map in terms of distance traveled. Okay, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you like the content, please like and subscribe, and I'll try to get more of that content out to you. Thank you.